Welcome, Pepperdine. We're glad that you're here. You are in for a treat this evening as we have a conversation about civil discourse. The Presidential Speaker Series is designed to bring in people who will challenge us to think about what it looks like to engage in this kind of conversation about difficult topics in a way that's civil and respectful, but convicted. That's what we're here. We're here for convicted civility. Tonight we have a special guest that most of you have probably read something that he has written or seen him on a YouTube video or something. Jonathan Haidt, not Haidt, Haidt, is a professor of ethical leadership at the NYU Stern School of Business. His research area is moral psychology, and he's done quite a bit of writing. Some of you know his books, The Happiness Hypothesis, or The Righteous Mind, or The Coddling of the American Mind. Tonight you see his provocative title up here, Civil Discourse in the University in an Age of Polarization, Outrage, and Social Media. And if you've read his most recent article in The Atlantic, you will know what this Tower of Babel imagery is for. Why the last 10 years of American life have been uniquely stupid. So please join me in welcoming Jonathan Haidt.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Jim, for not mispronouncing my name. It's always embarrassing. And here's my good friend, Jonathan Haidt. And what am I going to do? Say, no, you missed. Anyway, so thank you. So I've had a great day here. My first exposure to the campus, I'm in the car coming from the hotel, and I'm working on my presentation, and I look up and oh my God, there's the Pacific Ocean, and a giant American flag, and a giant steeple, and this is an awesome place. And I say that with some expertise because I study awe, and so I can certify this is an awesome place. Another thing that's awesome about it is that we're in a time when, in the last 10 years, as I'll argue, our entire society has been rewired in ways that are really, really bad for democracy and mental health. And universities are sort of ground zero for where the problem started, and for institutions that are very badly affected by this new problem that I'll talk about. And there are very few universities that are really doing something about it. And the fact that you have this speaker series, you have all kinds of programs to make a reality what Jim was just talking about. In fact, I gave 2 Zoom talks here to the regents and to some of the faculty a year and a half ago, and the question that I was given by Jim and the leadership was, how can we make Pepperdine become the premier institution in the nation for civil discourse? So that's really exciting to me, to have a community that wants to do this. And boy, do I want to help and be part of this. So that's what this talk is about. Now, the problems that I'll be talking about in the first part are almost universal at the country's premier secular universities. We're all failing in pretty much the same way. You have a lot of opportunity here. You have a lot of resources. You are different, and you have a lot that you can build on that will make you different and makes you more likely to be successful. One thing is that you have a mission. You have a moral mission. You have a religious identity. What we have now is a complete fragmentation of shared meaning. And a lot of the secular schools, such as mine at NYU, are trying to build on nothing. It's very hard to build on nothing. It's very hard to build a moral order on no secure foundation. But if you have moral resources, such as a religious identity, especially with ideas of service, humility, Christian virtues that are really conducive to a good life together. So I think you're starting way ahead of the pack here. And it's not just that you have a religious identity. It's that religious communities, the research shows, religious communities have a lot of advantages for civic life. Now, this is not necessarily true around the world, but a unique thing about the United States is that we never had a state religion. We had a free market in religions, which meant that anyone's free to start a church or split off or start a new congregation. Go ahead, attract people. And if you can do it, you'll survive. So we've had a free market in which American religious congregations had to compete with each other to be more appealing. Whereas in Europe, you've got a government-run church, and it doesn't have to adapt ever. So what's been found in the research is that when you look at people who take part in religious communities in the United States, they are better neighbors, better citizens than secular Americans. They're more generous with their time and money, especially in helping the needy, and they're more active in community life. And the key, it turns out, is not what you believe. It's that you're part of a community in which you have a common moral framework. And so again, you're starting off with a lot more promise. You really can do this. It'll be easier for you. You've got a lot of advantages compared to secular universities such as mine. Now, another advantage you have is that the particular religion, Christianity, drawing on the Bible, you have these rich stories that can serve as a basis for a common life. They're full of lessons. And the story that I've found the most resonant, the most powerful, the one that really helped me understand what on earth is happening to us is the story of Babel, the Tower of Babel. And so you all know it. I'll just give you the key line. The setup. The descendants of Noah are, heading across the plain of Shinar. They decide to build themselves a city, and God sees this. And once I published this, I've heard from a number of theologians. There are different interpretations, but it seems from the text on its face that there's something about the hubris here that God does not take well to. And God says, "Let us go down and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech." And when I reread that a couple years ago, I've been struggling to figure out what's going on since 2015. When I read that a couple years ago, a light bulb went off, like, yes, that's it. It's not that we're divided and that we have this left-right culture war, which I've been studying for 15 years now. It's that everything's fragmented. We can't even understand each other anymore. And so this story has really guided me, and I want to show you how I developed the metaphor. So put yourself in the place of these early people who, just a few generations after the flood, they built this thing. Can you imagine? Here, this is a 17th century illustration of the Tower of Babel. So it looks an awful lot like ancient Rome, but but imagine you built this thing as tall as the World Trade Center, and your life is so civilized, and things are great, and this is only the beginning of what we will do, the hope, the optimism. And then one day, all of a sudden, from out of nowhere, it's this. Everything's destroyed. And it's not that it's destroyed and you can commiserate. You can't commiserate because you can't understand each other in one day. And my argument is that's exactly what happened to us in the United States in the 2010s. And so let me tell you the story. So I wrote this up. I'm writing a book on this called Life After Babel, Adapting to a World We Can No Longer Share. And I took the main ideas from it and I put it in an article in The Atlantic that came out in April. So whether you've read that article or not, I'll guide you through 6 points that I hope you'll find interesting and relevant to your goal here to make this a great place for a civil discourse. So the first is young canaries in the coal mine. Actually, just a question. Raise your hand if you know exactly what that metaphor means. Canaries in the coal mine. Do you know what it is? Okay. Because younger people, okay, if you're an undergrad, here, raise your hand if you're an undergrad. Okay, now just those of you, do you know exactly what that metaphor is? Canaries in the coal mine? Raise your hand if yes. Yeah, I didn't think so. Okay, because Gen Z is cut off from everything that happened before about 2010. Like you have no opportunity to know things from the before time. So I'll explain it to you. So what happened was, there used to be in coal mines, miners would die from the carbon monoxide. So they'd bring a canary down in a cage, and canaries are very sensitive. Their hearts beat very fast. And if the canary falls over, that means, oh my God, carbon monoxide, let's all get out. Okay, so that's the metaphor. All right, so my argument is that Gen Z is the canary in the coal mine for the social media age, because Gen Z were the first people to move their lives onto these platforms, and they immediately became depressed and anxious. So here's how that looks. I discovered this, like many college professors, because the students coming in 2014 were really different from those who came in a couple years earlier. They were in defend mode. Now what that means is this. So the human brain has multiple systems that push against each other. It's a design feature that evolution hit on quite often. And so the front left cortex has all kinds of circuits that are known as the behavioral activation system. When we see something we want, when we desire something, we get energized, and we get all these circuits here that help us plan and focus and pursue a plan to get there. But then when we see a threat, the front right cortex system's there, the behavior inhibition system gets more active. You can't have them both on at the same time. It's one or the other. So if the front right cortex is activating, now it's like, how do I get out of here? What's going on? Where's safety? So you got these two systems pushing against each other. Let me give them more intuitive names. I'm going to call them discover mode and defend mode. We can only be in one at a time. You can't be in both. And here's what they look like behaviorally. When you're in discover mode, you feel like a kid in a candy shop. And if you remember what it was like when, you know, your aunt or your uncle would say, get whatever you want. You know, mom's not here, you go ahead. You're like, wow, really? And you're grabbing stuff, and it's so exciting. You might be jumping up and down. Okay, that's discover mode. You're seeing every new thing as an opportunity. What's that? Do I want that? Wow, what is it? You think for yourself. And the motto of a student in discover mode is, let me grow. Stand back, don't block me. I want to go, go, go. Whereas if you're in defend mode, every new thing, your first filter is it a threat? What is this? What is this? You have a scarcity mindset. There's never enough to go around. It's a very negative feeling. You'll cling to your team for safety. You need protection. You need help. And the motto of a student in defend mode is, keep me safe. I want you to keep me safe. I feel like I'm unsafe. And so the first person to really identify this, I believe, is my friend Greg Lukianoff, who is the president of the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education. And they've always stood up for students' free speech rights, always against administrators. It was always those darn administrators who are always worried about bad publicity and lawsuits saying, no, you can't say this, you can't do that. But suddenly, in 2014, it was the students who were saying, stop this speaker from coming. Don't let them assign this book. This is dangerous. Like, the students were asking for protections from books and words and speakers and ideas. And Greg, who suffers from depression or had suffered badly and learned cognitive behavioral therapy, Greg said, wait a second, the reasons the students are giving are exactly the cognitive distortions that I learned not to do when I got trained with CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, you know, overgeneralizing, catastrophizing. And so Greg came to talk to me because I'm a psychologist, and together, because I just began to see this too, and together we wrote up his idea in an article in The Atlantic in 2015. We didn't give it this title, the editors of The Atlantic did, but you know, if coddling just means overprotection, then it's not a bad title, because what we argued is that Gen Z, we didn't have the word back then. Back then we thought the kids were millennials, but because the word only came in around 2017. We analyzed what we thought was going on, the overprotection. Kids didn't have a chance to learn how to deal with threats and dangers, and we'd been overprotecting them, so they didn't have normal thick skin. So we made that argument, and that came out in August of 2015. Now, the kinds of things that Greg had noticed were, for example, demands for trigger warnings. A trigger warning is, you know, if a professor's going to assign a book, let's say it's Shakespeare or a Greek myth, and there's something that happens in it that might be upsetting, you can't just expect students to just read it and then they could be harmed by it. And so you need to warn them. At least that's what the students were saying. We couldn't understand it. What do you mean harmed by? What do you mean it's dangerous? So this wasn't there in 2012, but it started in 2014. And there was a big upturn in students demanding that people not be allowed to step foot on campus. Typically, they were speakers who were on the right, but sometimes it was like Christine Lagarde, who's not on the right, but she was accused of violating something or other, and the students said, no, we can't have her here. We started hearing about safe spaces. You know, I remember those from the Yugoslav wars, you know, like places where people could go where they wouldn't be killed. But this was places where a student could go and they wouldn't be exposed to toxic ideas that some speaker might be bringing onto campus in a talk that you don't have to go to. So we were all very puzzled by this in 2014, 2015, and that's the context within which Greg had his idea and we wrote it up. And the culture that emerged on most of our elite secular schools, and now most of the state schools, mostly everywhere. I don't think it's as much here. I'll ask you in a moment. Is this combination of things? They all go together. It's an attitude that words, books, speakers, ideas, the whole world is threatening. This is what a college looks like if you're locked into defend mode. If every book is a potential threat, every speaker, every person, every professor. And you think, you feel like a place like this might be hostile. So that's the phenomena. Now let me just ask those who are students at any level here, is there much talk about any of these terms? So the question is just yes or no. So raise your hand if you think the answer is yes, you hear these terms on campus. Okay, some of you. And raise your hand if no, this is not really happening at Pepperdine. Okay, so it's kind of split. It looks like more people are saying no. I believe at a place that's more politically conservative or religious, it's going to be much less, but it would be in certain departments and not in others would be my guess. So anyway, so you see, there's some elements of it here, but it's not as much as elsewhere. Now, why did this happen, and why did it happen in 2014? It was not there in 2012. And this is part of the reason. So this is data from a UCLA study of college campuses going on for many decades. So these were the rates of certain disorders when the millennials were the students. Gen Z is born 1996 and later, and they start showing up on campus. They turn 18 in 2014. So they're coming to campus here. What's that yellow line? The yellow line is psychological disorders. All of a sudden, almost instantly, like turning on a tap, the level of psychological disorder doubles, 100% increase in just a couple of years. And this is what happened. We suddenly were flooded by students in defend mode. It wasn't like this in 2012. So it turns out that there's a big gender difference. Now, so these are the rates of major depression, not just feeling kind of blue, but diagnosable major depression. Because it's not just college students, this is nationally, so these are teenagers. So boys, the rates were around 4%. Now, it does double from about 4% to about 8%. The girls start much higher, and that also doubles. So what you see on campus is that, yes, there's an increase in depressed boys, but the increase in depressed girls is gigantic. A huge number of young women are now suddenly depressed. And, there we are. So it's just depression and anxiety. It's not schizophrenia, it's not bipolar disorder, it's not drug abuse, it's just mood disorders, depression and anxiety. Here's the data on anxiety showing that it's also not something that was happening to everyone. It was only happening to young people. So this is if you break up, this is national data by age. So the baby boomers and Gen X, nothing's happening. They're not increasing. The millennials are going up. The millennials do have an increase, but it's small compared to what happened to Gen Z. So young people, teenagers, did not used to be, on a lot of measures, there wasn't much difference before, but now suddenly Gen Z, and especially Gen Z girls and women, are much, much more anxious and depressed than anyone else, than any generation in history. Some people have said, when we published a book on this in 2018, some people said, oh, come on, you're overreacting. This isn't real. It's just that Gen Z is really comfortable talking about it, and so they admit it, and that's good. This is progress. We should encourage this. They're not ashamed of it. They're talking about it. But it's not like Gen Z is sicker than previous generations. It's just a change in diagnostic criteria and norms. Well, if that were true, then we'd only see those increases in self-report, like in what people say. We wouldn't see it in behavior. But when we look at the number per 100,000 in the population that are admitted to hospitals every year because they harmed themselves so severely that their parents took them to a hospital, what we see is that, yes, the number does go up for boys, but it's from a very low level. And once again, we see the girls start higher and then go up enormously. So the number of girls being taken to hospitals now is so many times more than it was in 2010, 2011. In all these graphs, I put a line at 2012, and you'll see why later. But that is the transition point. It's also in suicide, most dramatically for younger teens. So the suicide rate is going up for boys and for girls. So let me be clear, boys are also doing badly, but it's not, I can't tie it to the factors I'll tie it to. The story for girls is clear, but boys are also not doing well. But notice this, for girls, there wasn't really an increase until 2012, and then in a single year, the number of preteen girls who killed themselves goes up 50%. And it wasn't, if you get a 50% increase, it's got to be a fluke. It's got to be that it'll come down the next year, but it wasn't. It was the start of a march to 100% increase. So to 134% increase. So something is going on, and it's not just here. It's the same thing in Canada and the UK. It's the same in all the English-speaking countries. It's happening in Europe, but not quite as much, but it's happening there too. But all the English-speaking countries are the same. So why? Why is this happening at the same time in multiple countries, and why is it hitting young girls the hardest? I wonder if you have any hypotheses. Well, we'll get to that in a moment, because it's actually two factors. It's not just social media. There's a backstory here, and the backstory is that there used to be dangers to growing up. There were drunk drivers, there were sexual predators, there was a lot of crime when I was growing up, but kids all over the country went out between ages of 6 and 8. We let kids out and they would play together, unsupervised. That's what children do. All over the world, they play together and they develop social skills and conflict resolution skills. That's what has always happened. That's what has to happen until the 1990s, when we decided, just as the crime rate plummeted and the drunk driving rate plummeted, we decided it's too dangerous. Can't let you out, you'll be abducted. So we stopped letting kids out, and by the early 2000s, you start hearing the stories of parents who get arrested, or at least their children are taken away from them, because someone called the police because their kid was seen unsupervised in a park, and that's child neglect. So once that started happening a few times, everybody kept their kids in, because you don't want to be arrested, you want your kids taken away. So we haven't let kids out since the 90s, practically, and the results from those who study play are that this should be disastrous, that kids are not going to develop healthfully if you don't give them a lot of free play. Peter Gray, a scholar at Boston College who studies free play, predicted in 2011 that this is going to cause an increase in depression and anxiety. And it turns out the very next year it started. I can show just how quickly things changed in this country. We have an audience of mixed ages here. I'm going to ask you this question. Everyone here think, at what age were you let out? Which means, at what age were you allowed to walk out of your house? Not just your backyard or your neighbors, but like you could go a quarter mile away alone. Oh, you know, Mom, I'm going to go visit Bobby's house, and we're going to go get pizza, or whatever it is. You know, we're going to ride our bicycles down to the park. So at what age were you able to do that? And answering this way, if that's what you did in first grade, you should say 6. If it wasn't until 9th grade, you should say 14. So everyone here, please pick a number for yourself. At what age were you let out? Now what I want to do is I want to have you answer by generation. So if you were born in 1980, 81 or earlier, raise your hand high. Okay, so all of you are old geezers like me. You're all, okay, put your hand down now. You're all Gen X or baby boomer, or maybe some of you are what's called silent generation, but Gen X and older. So just you. I'm going to sweep my finger across the room, and when I point to you, just yell out your number. Whatever that number is, just yell it out. Okay, ready? Older people, go.
6.
Okay, 6, 7, or 8. That's what I get all over the country. That's what it used to be. That's when kids are ready to go out on their own. That's when they start having adventures. They start building rafts and going down the Mississippi River. Whatever it is, kids go out and have adventures, certainly by 3rd grade. By age 8, you're out playing, okay? Now we're going to do Gen Z. I'll start at 1995 to bring in some more of the graduate students. So if you're born in 1995 or later, raise your hand high. Okay, so you're all Gen Z. So now we're going to do the same thing. When I point to you, yell out your number. Yell it real loud.
12.
Yeah. So yes, you could hear they're all 2-digit numbers. Okay. So what happened? What happened? The world got incredibly safe. The death rate for children plummeted from all causes. Car accidents, diseases, crime plummeted. Safest generation in American history, but we didn't let you out because we were too afraid. And so you didn't have unsupervised play until high school, really. Millennials, I'm sorry I didn't bother asking about you because you're not that interesting. It's just right in the middle. Trust me. Yeah. Okay. Now, just like, how crazy is this? This is from 1979. This is from a private school in Austin, Texas. And how do you know that your 6-year-old is ready to come to our first grade? And there are all the things that a first grader should be able to do. Can he travel alone in the neighborhood, 4 to 8 blocks, to the store, school, playground, with friends? At age 6. If you try that today, you will be arrested. Your kids will be taken from you. But that used to be the prerequisite for first grade. What did we do to ourselves? This is what we did. We freaked out. And we thought our kids were fragile, so we bubble wrapped them, but kids aren't fragile. If we're always there for them, guess what? They don't learn to take care of themselves. We deprive them of the opportunity to develop normal self-governance and self-direction. And when that happens, well, when do you stop? There's no clear stopping point if you don't stop in elementary school. So our motto should be, and this is in our book, The Coddling American Mind, the motto should be prepare the child for the road, not the road for the child. Another way to say it is the job of a parent is to work him or herself out of a job. And we forgot that in the 90s. Now, so that's the backstory. And that, I think, prepared Gen Z to be really weakened and damaged by social media. And so now let's turn to the social media piece, because only that can explain the timing. Why 2012? So here's the story. This graph shows the percentage of high school kids, different grades, that are daily users of a social networking site. And so you can see the steepest period of adoption is here. That's when teen life begins to really move on to online platforms. So the timing is this. In 2006, Facebook opens to everyone. Before then, you had to be a college student. But now any 12-year-old can open a Facebook account just by lying about her age. And so in 2007, the iPhone comes out, but very few middle school kids have one. It's expensive. They don't really have them then. In 2009, social media changes. It gets much more viral, much more engaging. Twitter adds the retweet button, Facebook adds the like button, and now they have huge amounts of data on engagement, and now they can algorithmicize everything. This is when it sucks kids in much more, and by now they're getting their own phones. Before they had flip phones. Millennials, you all remember flip phones? They didn't harm you. Flip phones are not bad for you. They're frustrating, but boy, did you get good thumb skills. But Gen Z, went straight to the iPhone. And a big innovation is the front-facing camera. Before then, do you remember older people, how you did selfies? Like, you'd go like that, and you'd have to tell, I missed, I got your head, like, I didn't get, But with the front-facing camera, now it's just selfies all day long. And then, in 2012, Facebook buys Instagram, which had just started a couple of years before, and that's when Instagram balloons, everyone's talking about it, everyone's on it. So this 2012 is really when teen social life, especially for girls, changes. Girls' social life is now dominated by Instagram, selfies, photos, commenting on each other's photos, looking at each other's photos of each other's perfect lives. It's always more perfect than reality and more perfect than your life. So that's when everything starts. That's when Gen Z is pushed off a cliff. At least this is the story that I'm telling. This is what I think has happened. We learned a lot a year ago when Frances Haugen, the Facebook whistleblower, told us that Facebook knows this. Facebook knows that Instagram in particular has many harmful effects on girls, and it's been doing a variety of things to hide its own findings. From a psychological point of view, what's the mechanism of harm? How does it hurt girls? In these 4 ways. So girls just use it a lot more. All kids are on their screens all day long, but the boys, when they got a phone, they went right for video games and YouTube. That's what the boys mostly do. And those are not particularly harmful. The girls went for the visual platforms. They went for Instagram, Pinterest, and Tumblr were the first 3 that they went for in 2012 when they got their phones. So girls just use social media a lot more. And when they use it, they talk about their emotions, especially their negative emotions. Boys don't do that much. So girls are also more affected. Look, everyone's insecure. Everyone is affected by social comparison, but girls are just more affected. by it, especially about their looks, their bodies, their skin, their hair. Girls are more affected by the fear of missing out. You see all those dots in Snapchat, oh, they're all over there and I'm not. It's painful for everyone, but it's more painful for girls. And finally, all kids, both sexes are actually equally aggressive, but boys' aggression is generally expressed more physically. Boys' aggression ultimately is a lead up to physical fighting or pain or harm or hurting. And when they all went on to video games, they couldn't do that. So actually, boys are less bullied than they were back when they were physically together. Whereas girls' aggression has always been relational. Girls don't punch each other so much. They harm other girls' relationships and reputations. And social media allows them to do it all day long, on weekends too, with invisibility and deniability and anonymously. So social media took all the worst parts of middle school and made them 3 times worse for girls. So I laid all this out in an article in The Atlantic with that title if you want to look at it and see the case. I won't go through this now. But I've been debating with other scholars, and I keep challenging them. Okay, you think I'm wrong? You tell me why this happened. You tell me why they fell off a cliff in 2012. And no one can come up with a reason. It's not the Great Recession. That was in 2008, 2009, and the economy's just gotten better and better from 2009 to 2019. It just got better and better, and the girls got worse and worse. Boys too, but the girls especially got worse and worse. So no one has another theory other than this one. If you have one, please say at the end. We'll have a discussion. I'd love to hear it. Okay, so sorry, that was the longest part because I'm very upset about this, and we've got to do something quickly. We've got to raise the age to 16. Puberty is the key thing. Puberty, the brain is changing very rapidly. To have children going through puberty while posting photos of themselves in bathing suits is just sick, and we've got to stop it. Okay, now that we've talked about that, the canaries in the coal mine, now let's talk about what it's done to democracy. And this will get us on to the civil discourse angle as well. So, older people, do you remember this? Do you remember this year? This was the most incredible thing. The fall of the Berlin Wall. People, I'm 58, do you remember that documentary The Day After about nuclear war? We grew up thinking, there probably won't be a nuclear war, but it's 30%, 30% likelihood that we'll all die in nuclear war. And now oh, that's gone. So this incredible period of democratic optimism, when we thought this is the end of history. Not that nothing's going to happen, but that the end, the direction, the goal of all countries, of all human development is towards liberal democracy and free markets. And if we just let North Korea and Iran, let them liberalize, the people will want rights, we won. And this incredible democratic optimism was just supercharged by technological optimism because, my God, how are those dictators going to stand up to people with the internet? You can't stop them. Good luck, China, keeping the internet out. That's impossible, right? So we thought that this was just going to be the greatest thing for democracy, and it's just going to be smooth sailing from here on in, and we thought. And if you look at the data on free countries versus dictatorships, that period from 1990 through the early 2000s, as you see, the number of free countries, half the world, half of the countries rather, were classified as free all the way up to about 2012, 2013. And I want to take you back to the peak year of techno-democratic optimism, which is 2011, an extraordinary year which begins with the Arab Spring, because we thought, okay, it happened to Eastern Europe in the early 1990s. Finally, it's come to the Arab world. The Arab world is going to also embrace democracy. Those dictators, those brutal, cruel dictators, they're all going down. And that extraordinary year ended with Occupy Wall Street, where we thought the people empowered are finally going to bring about more equality, to bring down the fat cats, the exploiters, we'll have better capitalism, we thought. So this extraordinary year, and Mark Zuckerberg was given Person of the Year just the year before, in 2010. When Zuckerberg took Facebook public in 2012, again, 2011, 2012, this is the turning point. When he took Facebook public in 2012, in his letter to investors, he said, our society has reached a tipping point. He said, Facebook aspires to build the services that give people the power to share and help them once again transform many of our core institutions and industries. Are any of you Burkean conservatives? That is, do any of you know who Edmund Burke is and like him? Raise your hand if you know who Edmund Burke is and like him. Okay. What do you think Edmund Burke would say about this? Okay. So institutions are hard to build and easy to destroy, and there's a wisdom built into them over the generations. What do you say we let a 25-year-old kid rewire everything? What could go wrong? So that's the end of chapter 2, techno-democratic optimism. Well, here's what went wrong. Part 3. So I am a social psychologist. I'm on Twitter somewhat, not much of the other platforms, so I don't know a lot about the technology. But as I was working on this and trying to figure out what happened to us, I met a really brilliant young technology writer, Tobias Rose Stockwell, and together we put our heads together. We wrote an Atlantic article in 2019 laying out exactly what happened. So early social media was not toxic. It was just a glorified address book, Facebook. There was Friendster and MySpace and the Facebook originally. And you put up photos of yourself and you link to the people that you like, so somebody else could be on your page and say, oh, who does Bill like? Okay, I'll go to his friends. Like, totally non-toxic, perfectly fine. And as I said before, everything changes in 2009 because now, first of all, we already had the news feed coming in. So it's not just, here's a photo of my dog. It's, can you believe what the Republicans did about this thing? Or whatever. So now you can like things, you can retweet things. So the basic dynamics of social media changes fundamentally. It becomes much more hyper-viralized. It's like a version of COVID with an R0 of 1.1 versus 3. Like, it's going to spread just much more rapidly. And the retweet button is particularly powerful here. One of the engineers who worked on that for Twitter, who built the retweet button, he said, when he was interviewed later in BuzzFeed, he said, he thought originally that it was going to have all these wonderful equalizing effects, but he said he thought at the time we just handed a loaded weapon to a 4-year-old. Before the retweet, Twitter was largely a convivial place. After all, hell broke loose and spread. And those of you who remember what Twitter was like in 2007 to 2009 or so, it was very nice. People were nice to each other. Not anymore. So ever since then, the platforms, those that are based on advertising revenue, where the users are not the customers, they're the product. And so the goal is to keep the users on as long as possible to maximize the benefit to the customers, who are the advertisers. So here's what happens then. After everything gets more viralized, Facebook has all this information. They can algorithmicize everything. Upworthy masters the art of headline packaging because now Facebook is gradually taking over everything. People don't go to the New York Times or the Atlantic as much. Somebody sends them a link on Facebook, and then they go from there. So how do you pick headlines to maximize clicks? The news outlets are all losing money. They're hemorrhaging money. They're going out of business. So they have to adapt or die. So now they get much more clickbaity. Everything is oriented around Facebook. Facebook introduces threaded comments in 2013, which is an invitation to fight with other people in the comments. So even if you only have 7 followers yourself, if you say a nasty thing on a post by Barack Obama or Kim Kardashian or whatever, now millions of people can see your obnoxious thing that you posted, and millions of people can yell at you, and you can yell at them, and suddenly you're a celebrity. So 2013 is when things really begin to heat up. This is exactly when Russia activates its Internet Research Agency. They've been messing with us since the 50s, trying to make us convinced that we all hate each other, that we're racist and anti-Semitic. They've been trying to start race wars and all sorts of things since the 50s, and we just made it so easy for them. They don't even have to come here. They just sit in St. Petersburg and do it. And so my argument is that 2014 is when the tower falls. So it fell once in biblical times, and we gradually rebuilt it. But in 2014, we knocked it over again. And so this is exactly when everything went weird on campus. It wasn't like this in 2012. It was still really fun to be a professor in 2012. And since 2015, it's a lot less fun. This is when everyone started being afraid. You started seeing things like, I'm a liberal professor, and my liberal students terrify me. So I've been focused on campus. I think the pathology is on the left, and I'll get to that in a moment, but it also is hitting the right. Trump could not have won without Twitter. Someone as corrosive to norms of democracy and decency could not have won without Twitter. And look what it's done to the Republican Party now. I'll come back to that in a moment. Brexit would not have happened without Facebook. Now, let me be clear. The Trump election and the Brexit elections are democracy. This is the way the system worked. They were voted in. This is not anti-democracy. This is democracy in action. But things are coming out really differently and surprisingly. So everything's getting warped. There's a lot more conflict, just more conflict all the time. Once the tower falls, it's fragmentation, it's conflict, it's incoherence, it's confusion. We get much more active protest on the left and on the right with more violence. We've been very lucky. When I was a kid, there were bombs going off every week, multiple bombs every week in 1968, 69, 70, a lot of violence, political violence. We've had very little since then, but it is increasing now. And it's not just us. We are the premier case. Our democracy has plunged the furthest in its health, but the number of democracies began declining in the late 2010s. And on this slide, you can see the VDEM Institute, which is the main source of data about democracy around the world. In this period I'm talking about, the number of liberal democracies is decreasing and the number of closed autocracies is increasing. So it's not just us, it's around the world. It's particularly resonant for us because we invented modern liberal democracy. James Madison in particular was a brilliant political psychologist. Madison knew that all previous democracies had died, usually pretty quickly and violently, because democracy means rule by the people, and the people are passionate, and they form mobs, and they get angry, and they attack each other, and they trample on minority rights. So they didn't want to give us a democracy. They gave us a republic with democratic elements, because Madison knew that we are prone to faction or division or tribalism, and that this is sown in the nature of man. And he talked about how so often we are divided into parties, inflamed with mutual animosity, and rendered much more disposed to vex and oppress each other than to cooperate for their common good. It's like he knows the US Congress today. So how did that happen? That it's just all conflict all the time. There's no cooperation, or hardly any. Now this line, actually I'm curious, raise your hand if you've ever seen this line. Raise your hand if this is familiar to you. Okay, so this one is widely quoted in basic political science classes. But the next sentence, I didn't know until I was reading the Federalist Papers in the last couple of years. So strong is this propensity of mankind to fall into mutual animosities that where no substantial occasion presents itself, the most frivolous and fanciful distinctions have been sufficient to kindle their unfriendly passions and excite their most violent conflicts. Now that's Twitter. It's like he knows Twitter. Like, oh, what should we fight about today? Someone wore a dress? Okay, let's argue about it. Like, someone said something. Okay, let's have a national debate and a hate fest over someone said something somewhere in the country. Oh, just out of curiosity, raise your hand if this is familiar to you. Raise your hand if you've seen this before. Okay, so many fewer. Okay, so that was my sense was that, but this line is the key line, I think, for the age of social media. There's a fantastic book, especially those of you interested in political science, Jonathan Rauch, this brilliant book, The Constitution of Knowledge. He argues that the Constitution was this brilliant design for taking disagreement and converting it into good policy by making people improve their policies and compromise and work together. And he argues that our epistemic institutions, that is those that generate knowledge, like the legal system, journalism, and universities, also work in this way, like the US Constitution. So that's what makes us so smart, not our high IQ. It's an institution that puts us together in ways in which I say what I believe, and I can't find evidence against me. I'm always right, I think. But other professors are pretty good at finding evidence against me. And then I have to do something. I have to refine my position or look harder for evidence. So that's how we get smarter, is by the opposition, by coming together in civil ways to debate and improve each other's thought. But what happens when everyone is on social media? And my argument in the Atlantic piece, the metaphor that I use that many people seem to find helpful is, you know, that Twitter engineer, he said it's like we handed a loaded gun to a 4-year-old, but a gun kills people, and Twitter doesn't kill people, at least not directly. It's more like a dart gun. And imagine that we handed out dart guns to everyone in the country. Everyone gets a dart gun, unlimited darts. Oh, actually, we'll pay you The more darts you shoot, the more money you make. Because the more darts you shoot, the more prestige you'll get, the more followers you'll get. The more people you attack, the more famous you'll be. So what do you think it would be like to live in that country? Well, we know. That's our country. So at least if you're in public life in any way, or if you're a professor, if you have an audience, people can shoot you for anything you say, and there's no accountability. They might even be anonymous. So how does this change the system? And as I argued, most people don't want to shoot anybody. So what if we passed out dart guns to everybody, and only 4 groups used them? The far left, the far right, trolls, who are almost always men who enjoy harassing people, being a jerk, making fun of people. It's a small number of men, but they're able to, they used to just annoy a few dozen or 100 people. Now they can harass millions. Oh, and Russian agents. We made it super easy for them. So if those 4 groups start shooting darts like crazy, and the middle 80% of the country now goes silent, what would our democracy look like? What would the public square look like if most of us don't dare say anything? I fear that you can't have a democracy. You can't have a functioning country for much longer if that's the situation. What happens is what I've called structural stupidity. I'm surrounded by brilliant people in universities, and yet you put them together and they say incredibly stupid things. And it's the same at the New York Times, and it's the same in museums, in the arts. And what happens is, because each side is shooting not so much the other side, they're shooting their own moderates. They're the best targets. They're close. You can all gang up and harass them. You can actually change their behavior. You can force them to apologize. It's really fun. But you can't shoot across the aisle. It doesn't do anything. So the far left is shooting all the moderates go quiet, and then the far left comes up with absurd, bizarre policy prescriptions that everybody hates, including most people on the left, like defund the police, like a lot of the stuff going on with gender ideology, a lot of these things that most people really hate, but they don't dare say anything if they're on the left. So it goes through and the policies are implemented. So you get structural stupidity over here. Now here, it's the same. It's a little different, but it's analogous. So if both sides are shooting their moderates, I just want to show, and the moderates and centrists go quiet, let me just show you how I think this works out. So when you lose viewpoint diversity, in these institutions, almost everybody's on the left, as I said, about my field, certainly psychology, most fields. So if everyone's on the left, nobody dares speak up when someone says something stupid if it's ideologically attractive. And so the left keeps implementing policies that backfire on election day. Like the San Francisco schools couldn't get the kids into school during COVID, but boy, were they good at ripping off Lincoln and Washington from school names. Like, what a stupid thing to do. And it hurts the Democrats, ultimately. Now, on the right, the problem is different. My argument, you may disagree with me, my argument is that the Republican Party is the structurally stupid party because they've shot all their moderates. Only 10 people dared to vote for impeachment, and they're almost all gone now. The Republicans got rid of them. Shamefully, with help from the Democrats, in the case of a couple of them funding Trump candidate. Anyway, my point is the Republican Party is now the stupid party because they have no dissent. The Democrats, they have a far left wing and the moderates. And who wins? Usually the moderates. The Democrats are not the stupid party. The Republicans are the stupid party. But the left controls almost all of our cultural and educational institutions. And when those go stupid, we're in big trouble. So I hope I've offended everybody equally. In any case, we are now, if James Madison could come back, he would not be happy with us. So that's Madison's nightmare. So what do we do? As I said, I'm extremely concerned about the future of our country. And I think if we keep going on the way that we're going to fail catastrophically as a country. We'll still be able to get deliveries from Amazon, but we're not going to have a continuous period of governance from 1787 through, let's say, 2040. Like, I don't think we're going to make it to 2040. If things keep going the way they're going, we're going to have to make big changes. We're going to have to rise up, do something about social media, about our democratic institutions. This is the challenge of our time. This is a challenge for all of the generations sitting here, especially, sorry, Gen Z, we prevented you from developing these skills. We made you weaker and depressed. Oh, here, take this broken democracy, fix it. What can we do? So I think if you follow me on this analysis of how we're no longer interacting in ways that are compatible with democracy, I think there are three things we have to do, and I'll just give you two examples of each of them. And how are we on time? Fine. So we have to harden or improve our democratic institutions so that they can still function. I think we're going to have a lot more political violence in the next 5 or 10 years. I think we'll go back to periods when there were assassinations and bombings and things like that. Can we have elections? Can we have the process that we've had when there's more political violence and a lot more hatred? Well, we have to think now about how to survive that. And so I think the most insane thing we do in this country is close party primaries. No other country does this. It's completely stupid to say, let's have only the 5 or 10% of each party show up and vote for the candidate they want, which means that only the extremists get the nomination. But it also means that once you're in office, in Congress, you don't care about the general election. The general election doesn't matter for Congress. Like 5%, 5 or 7% of congressional races are competitive. All that matters is the primary. So you should never compromise. You should never work with the other side because you'll lose the primary. So this is completely insane. We've got to get rid of closed party primaries. Well, California, you're actually it's complicated. I can't get a clear read on whether your open primary is working. I hear that it's better than what was here. Of course, your state has so many other problems. It's very hard to judge, how it's working out. But at any rate, the political scientists are divided. But I think the consensus generally is that closed party primaries are bad. The winning party must not control the process of voting. This is extremely frightening to me. We need nonpartisan redistricting, and we need nonpartisan election rules. And here we're having, both sides are guilty of all sorts of things, although the effort to control boards of election and things like that are, I think, very, very frightening. And I think we need to, especially those institutions like universities on the left, they really need to regain the trust. People on the right really distrust universities, the sciences. They don't distrust science, they distrust scientists, because scientists are almost all on the left, and they keep opining about political matters that they're not experts in. Anyways, there's a lot we need to do to improve our democratic and epistemic institutions. To reform social media, the big things that we can do are we need to, I think it's insane that we allow anyone to create 1,000 accounts and use them to harass people with no identification. So I'm not saying you need to post under your real name, but it'd actually be very easy. There's all kinds of ways where in order to open a Facebook account, you have to show that you're a real human being in a particular country and you're over 18 or whatever the age is. We have to do that. So if we do that, that would get rid of most of the Russians, and that would slow down a lot of the trolls. It would have a lot of benefits. You could still use a fake name, but you have to at least show once that you're a real person. There's a lot we can do to reduce the virality of the extremists. And we do need, when we made the FCC, when television came in, radio and television, there was no way to govern it. We had to have somebody in government that had expertise. We need that for social media. The federal government has no way to deal with any of this. Oh, and just by the way, if you want to follow up on this, I have all my papers on social media are there. And finally, we have to prepare the next generation for democratic citizenship. We've done a horrific job of that. And so there's a lot that we can do. The most important thing, I think, is we've got to restore free play, which is biologically necessary for healthy development. We took it away. If you have children under the age of about 13, please see letgrow.org. It's an organization I co-founded with Lenore Skenazy, who wrote a book called Free Range Kids, about the value of letting kids be free range, be out on their own. We need to raise the age to 16 and enforce it. There are all kinds of things that would build more cohesion and also foster development. I think a red-blue exchange, really not mandatory, not that you have to do this, but really making it a norm that before you come to college, spend a year away from your parents exploring some very different culture. If you're in a blue part of the country, go to a red part and vice versa. That would do so much for the country and for Gen Z. So there's so much that we could do. And yes, letgrow.org. So in the final section, civil discourse. So how can we use all of this stuff to help you here at Pepperdine? And so to return to the question, the challenge that you've set for yourselves about becoming the premier institution, I'll just give you 3 or 4 principles here. So first principle is that in the post-Babel world, there are no longer any stable and widely shared stories. Everything is fragmented. We are in the days after the tower has fallen. We cannot understand each other. What that means is that life in every institution is a battle for narrative control. So leadership must establish the moral framework and then defend it against attacks. This is what secular universities failed to do in 2015, except the University of Chicago. It's the one place where the president said, nope, we're not going to fire people because someone's upset that they said something. Scholars should be able to study and write and speak, and classrooms are not safe spaces. So it's a very different world now than it was, say, in 2010. And you have a good, strong foundation upon which to do that. I think, as I said before, the Christian virtues are particularly good for civil discourse, for living together, not just despite our differences, but to take advantage of our differences. Secondly, the dominant new moral framework that came up in 2015 is what's called intersectionality, which on its own is a good idea. There's a great talk by Kimberly Crenshaw. She points out that people's identities are not just additive. If you're a black woman, it's not just the sum of being black and being female, that there are unique indignities and obstacles that black women face that you wouldn't know unless you listen to them, unless you make an effort to look at those intersections. So the basic idea of intersectionality, I think, is actually very good. The problem, I believe, is that it ends up pitting people against each other in this way. As it's taught, so this is just one of the examples, there are a lot of images like this. What you learn to do, as it's implemented on college campuses, you learn to see people as being members of these binary groups, but they're not just descriptive, they're moral categories. Because the people above the line are the powerful people, which means they're the morally bad people, they're the oppressors. And the people below the line are the morally good people. And you learn to look at intersections, and so the intersection of greatest evil is the heterosexual white male. That is the problem. They're the problem. They're the bad people. We have to take them down. We have to have less of them. They're the cause of our problems. And anytime you're telling young people, look at these people are the bad people, like, this does not have a good history on this planet, okay? Like, this is not what we should be doing. And the idea, which you see in a lot of the discourse, of course, powerful people should not be criticizing or saying no or in any way going up against people below them, because that's punching down. Punching down is bad, but you know what? Punching up is good. So shooting darts at those leaders, accusing them of all kinds of things, that's good, that's virtuous. The more darts you shoot, the more money you make in terms of social prestige. Common enemy identity politics, that's all gang up against them, the bad people, that's terrible. But common humanity identity politics, that actually works. That's the kind that works in the civil rights movement, Nelson Mandela, whatever you want to look at. The movements that work are those that are based on love and inclusion. Pauli Murray, when my brothers try to draw a circle to exclude me, I shall draw a larger circle to include them. And it's not a coincidence, I think, that she was an ordained minister. I created, pay close attention to the first 2 weeks, because that's when norms are set. I co-created a program that teaches skills of engaging in dialogue and discourse about all kinds of differences. If you go to constructivedialogue.org, I hope you'll consider using it here at Pepperdine. Lastly, in our polarized time, nothing will work if people are quick to condemn. And that's what social media has done. It incentivizes complaint, moaning, pointing out problems. It's very good at ripping things down. So I think you can only get things to work if you emphasize the principle of charity, giving people the benefit of the doubt. So I'll end with what I'm calling the post-Babel outrage reduction pledge. I'm going to ask you all to repeat with me. It's up to you. You don't have to do this. But I'm going to, on the count of 3, we'll say just the things in bold. The idea here is, we have to be more polite. We're living in a tinderbox. We're living in a culture war. We have to be careful what we say. We have to think about our words. I agree with that. At the same time, we have to then be more forgiving of other people, understanding that everything is distorted. This is the post-Babel world. We have no ability really to find truth. So don't be so sure of yourself when you're judging others. They're just as blinded and crazed as you are. So we need to take less offense. And we need to, if you routinely forward things to others, memes or outrage stories, just cut it just by 90%. Cut it by 90%. We will all be so much better off, and then we'll only be 3 times as outraged as we were 10 years ago. So on the count of 3, if you're willing, nice and loud. 1, 2, 3. I will give less offense. I will take less offense. I will pass on less offense. Okay? If you all live by that, I think you'll be successful in your mission. Thank you.